Welcome, everyone. You are at a UN High-Level Political Forum for Sustainable Development webinar, and we'll be talking about catalyzing landscape partnerships for ecosystem restoration and prosperous livelihoods today with a very exciting and engaging panel. So wonderful to have you. So with that, I think we'll go into, I have my co-facilitator here, Blake Ratner from CORE, and I will pass to him, and he can talk a bit about the objectives of our time together today.
Great, thanks a lot, Bemi, and really wonderful to have a chance to have this panel along with such a diverse group that's joining us from around the world. What we're aiming to achieve in this hour and 15 minutes that we've allotted is first to be able to build awareness around landscape solutions as responses to global challenges, everything from climate change to food security to poverty reduction to conservation and much more. The second aspect is to really support connections and learning and partnerships across countries and regions. We want to begin this here, but it's something that we hope that you'll be able to join as we go forward as well, and we'll wrap up with a way for you to be clear about how to keep connected to this ongoing action space. The third objective is around making sure that we have clarity about how landscape approaches can help to support progress around the SDGs, and particularly SDG 17, the goal around global partnerships for sustainable development, which includes partnerships and collaboration at regional, at national, and at subnational scales. And I think the conversation will allow us to make some connections at each of these levels. And the last objective is to invite future collaboration. We're hoping that we can connect both funders and landscape partners, researchers, and supporters of landscape initiatives in countries around the world under the banner of this 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People initiative. Thanks. Bemi?
Thanks, Blake. So now we'd love to introduce the wonderful panelists we have with us today, again, from all over the world. Like I said, my name's Bami. I'm sitting in Los Angeles, California, and I'm with Eco Agriculture Partners. And so what we'll do is for each of our partners here today, if you could say your name, your organization, and your role as it relates to a landscape approach. And so I'll go ahead and, Blake, why don't I pass it to you real quick to say your introduction, and then we can, and then I'll can facilitate guiding, having other folks introduce themselves.
Thanks very much. Blake Ratner. I am founder and director of an organization called Collaborating for Resilience, or CORE for short, that focuses on the practice of multi-stakeholder dialogue and inclusive natural resource governance around the world.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Let's see, Gustavo, how about I have you introduce yourself? Name, role, and a little bit about work related to landscape approach.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with these great panelists. I'm Gustavo Rojas. I'm seated in Mexico City. I work for Rainforest Alliance, and most of the experience I'm going to share today comes from a landscape that we're supporting here in Mexico, in Western Mexico, in Jalisco, which is one of the most important states of food production here in Mexico.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gustavo. Jagdish, I see you next on the screen. I'll go ahead and hand it to you.
Hi, good, what should I say? Good morning. It's good evening here. I'm from India. I represent some 23 organizations who have come together under a common umbrella called Common Ground. I am the convener for Common Ground Initiative. I also am the chief executive of a backbone organization created to serve the Common Ground. It's called Living Landscapes. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Jagdish. John, I'll pass the introduction over to you.
Yes, good evening. It is 4:41 p.m. in Kenya, Nairobi. I am the national coordinator for the Kenya Landscape Actors Platform. This is a platform that undertakes integrated landscape management in the Republic of Kenya and East Africa. And Kenya specifically has agroecologies right from forest lands, farmlands, water bodies, rangelands, mountains and hills, which are representative of sub-Saharan Africa. And hence, this platform basically works together for productive and resilient landscapes to be able to secure food, biodiversity, equitable livelihoods, and then also sustainable investments. Glad to be part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And Litul, I'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Bemi, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Litul Barua, and I'm calling from India. So good evening. And I'm the senior program manager at Loudus Foundation, leading the work on regenerative production landscapes. Loudus Foundation is a foundation dedicated to address climate change, nature loss, and social inequality. And our landscape works now covers 1 million hectares and 300,000 farmers across India, Pakistan, Tanzania, and Brazil. We are working through industry and I think through landscapes. So I'll talk more later. We are looking at how businesses can come in and adopt landscape as part of their business model. So nice to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks for the introductions. I think this is a great opportunity for cross learnings in our time together today. What we'll do next is a quick poll. So an interactive opportunity to become a little familiar with what people know about landscape approaches. And so you should see that up in your screen now, and you should be able to do that. Level of understanding of landscape approaches.
Thanks, Benny. And I think while people are responding to the poll, we'll give that a minute or two. But I want to just say a few words about under the banner of the 1000 Landscapes Initiative, which brings together sort of wide range of partners working in different regions, some of the ways in which the notion of landscape approaches really resonates with me personally. I think one of those is that it's something that requires necessarily an integrated approach. It's not about only agricultural production. It's not only about conservation. It's not only about one aspect of the regional economy or the social benefits or the economic angle. It really is something that requires an integrated approach at a landscape scale. And when we say landscape, we're thinking about anything from a watershed that may serve some tens of thousands of people to a larger river basin or ecoregion that may be a source of livelihood for several million. And it's this integrated aspect that translates into practice in a way that really pushes a wide range of actors to figure out how they can respond to this challenge in a way that brings out the differences in expertise and abilities across these different scales of action and across sectors. Those are some of the aspects that really stand out to me.
That's great, Blake. And I think that sets the stage of some of the discussion we'll have with the panelists and how their perspective from the context and landscapes that they're working in and how they see these things coming together in terms of optimizing synergies and managing trade-offs in a place in collaboration.
If we don't have the poll results yet, if you're still collecting that, I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and kick off the discussion among the panelists. We can take down the panelists slide on the screen. And Jagdish, I'd like to begin with you. If you could describe a little bit about what your journey has been in thinking about the need for landscape approaches, how it emerged in your own work. And then we'll come back and see that poll when it's ready.
This must be about 10, 15 years ago, around the time that I met you, Blake. And these are issues that were coming up across villages. It was a small initiative that we started in Rajasthan, in Western India. And a group of researchers wanted to inquire into how different actors in a district of Rajasthan could come together to address a serious drought situation. And it was the beginning of a wonderful journey, one of which was each person in the room was entering into the system from a different lens altogether. The veterinary service people were looking at the problems that drought was hitting on the livestock, whereas the milk union, which was interested in collecting the milk from the district, was seeing a shortfall in the amount of milk that was coming in. Another civil society organization was looking at fodder and the availability of fodder for the local livestock, and so on. Those local self-help groups were looking at loss of incomes. So all of them, in a carefully articulated discussion, realized that the scale at which they need to work is not only a district, but probably a few districts together, and to bring a range of actors in. And that's where I reached out to you, if you could come and help us have this difficult conversations between people who align on the same purpose. Should I stop there, or should I go on with that?
Thanks, Jagdish. Well, let's pause there. We can come back to that to pick up that story. Let's see, do we have the poll results to share, Shannon, Brianna?
We do, yes.
If you can put those on the screen. Oh, there they are.
See them.
So it looks like the largest response is those, in fact, who are deeply involved in landscape approaches at subnational or national scale, and then a large group as well who are partly involved in landscape approaches, whereas it's 17%, a smaller group that is aware but not actively using them or supporting them in their work, and just 2% who claim to be unaware of what landscape approaches or integrated landscape management is about. So clearly we've got a large majority that is either actively involved or partly so as part of their work. And I think that puts the onus on us as a panel to make sure that we share a bit of the reality of the challenges of working in these contexts, and hopefully connect to the experiences that those on this webinar have as well. So Gustavo, I'm going to go to you next. You mentioned that you're focused on work in Jalisco, which is a state on the Pacific coast of Western Mexico. Tell us a little bit about what the landscape approach means in that context and how it responds to these diverse global challenges from your perspective.
Sure. So, as I said, it's a landscape that is situated in Jalisco, which is a big producer of food. And one of the challenges that we had when we got to this, it's 4 municipalities landscape, was to try to balance the agricultural, very heavy, very powerful part of the landscape and some environmental issues in the landscape. So we tried to work, our first approach was to be very inclusive on the multi-stakeholder platform that we started to develop. And for that, we started to implement some technical assistance in the territory so we could start looking for these leaderships and try to bring them to the decision-making. And it was not very easy because at the same table, you're going to have big agro-industry actors, exporters of avocado, exporters of agave, and also local leadership representatives. So we started working from there and trying to share and through the transparency of the data we were recovering through Landscale, which is a tool that we developed in Rainforest Alliance for measuring impact at the landscape level. And from there, I think one of the big, I would say, success was to bring all this information to the table and make transparency a way to discuss with the actors and trying to convey different points of view for the landscape a partnership and for the vision ahead, and trying to balance those voices at some point. So I think that was one of the main issues that we had to deal with there in this landscape.
Thanks, Gustavo. That aspect around bringing everyone to the same table and, like you said, balancing different voices, I'm sure there's a lot of nuance underneath that in terms of what that has meant in practice. We'll come back to that, no doubt. But I want to turn next to Litul. You mentioned in your introduction that Laudes Foundation has a lot of focus on the role of business in influencing and hopefully influencing in a positive way outcomes at the landscape scale. Tell us a little bit about that challenge and how you go about engaging in it.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. So for us, the work started initially, around 2015 when Laudes Foundation was supporting, production of sustainable cotton, mostly organic, and like working with, the businesses to scale the production and also the uptake of cotton, with the primary objective of helping farmers and environment on the ground. And then we realized at that time that a lot of the issues are very place based, and just focusing on single commodity or single commodity based approach is not really leading to very meaningful impact on the ground in terms of farmers and all. So while we've been very successful in building the market linkage for cotton, which was the key focus at the time, we also realized that most smallholder farmers are also growing other crops and having market access for that, and even things like access to finance or soil degradation or water are big issues for which a more integrated approach is needed. And that's something where we felt as a philanthropic foundation working towards transitioning business models, I think we need to demonstrate that on the ground. So building on that cotton work, so through this 4 landscape partnerships which I talked in the beginning, we are actually working with many of those businesses on the ground in terms of how they can transform their sourcing models towards supporting more landscape-based approaches where they have better visibility of their product. They can also help addressing nature-related impacts on the ground, and also build community resilience. While so this at the pilot level is something which have been able to do with many big companies from the fashion sector, and then we're also looking at food. But it's a very systemic approach, and I think most practitioners, when they get into it, it makes a lot of sense. But I think also we see that because multiple stakeholders are involved with multiple interests in a landscape, everyone is looking at part of the component, and it's the responsibility of the convener to piece this all together. And sometimes I think for the private sector, right now our work has been to see how do we simplify it for them to understand, because I think, and that's where this demonstration in the 4 landscapes is very critical. But our ultimate objective is can businesses as part of their sourcing model look at more landscape based approaches instead of just focusing on a compliance based top down approach. So that's where we are in terms of so right now I think what we have been in the last 3 to 4 years when we started working on landscapes, been able to do is with few businesses pilot it in the 4 countries where I am talking about. But I think there's a journey to cover in terms of seeing that this become more mainstream approach for businesses.
Okay, great. Thanks, Litul. We're going to come back to that question about the journey for business. But before we do that, John, you introduced briefly about the Kenya Landscape Actors platform, but clearly you found a need to link together different actors working at landscape scale. Can you explain a bit about how you came to realize that need and how that helps to address the global goals that we've been talking about?
Yes, the population of Kenya is 55 million people as of right now. And 3/4 of the country is either arid or semi-arid with a rainfall regime of 500 millimeters or below. Now, with that, it basically means that there is a need to use innovative ways to ensure that there's food security feeding these 55 million people. But then also Kenya has got diverse landscapes. These landscapes mentioned are from the Indian Ocean coastal part, and therefore there are water bodies around there, all the way to the rangelands, the arid areas. Then there are farmlands too, because it's an agricultural economy. And then there are forest lands. Then there are mountains and hills, the likes of Mount Kenya, Mount Elgon, and such like. Now, one of the things that has faced the communities around is that there is fragmented landscape activities ongoing across the country and by different actors. And sometimes resources are perceived as inadequate and with low impact, which is dotted across the nation. So that made it challenging in terms of having impact at scale to be able to address challenges of landscapes that are degraded and compounded by climate change, leading to food insecurity, that's arising in the country. So to address these challenges, it needed a convening platform that fosters collaboration, enhances governance, and at the same time helps in mobilizing financial resources to facilitate landscape actions. As per the SDP 17 about strengthening the implementation and revitalizing of partnerships for sustainable development, this now became a partnership at national level to be able to educate stakeholders on the need for integrated landscape management approach while advocating for policy harmonization. And hence it began last year, and we're in the first year of it altogether and plan to continue having activities which are essential. One of the main activities that we planned for nationally is having a national landscapes conference per year, and we planned for one by this year, so that we bring together all these different actors in the country, plus international actors, and then those from neighboring countries of Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Somalia also are involved because they also want to do something similar in their countries around. So we see this as a way of providing a learning environment for countries around in the East African community in Sub-Saharan Africa to be able to learn from us and have a similar initiatives to be able to take at scale integrated landscape management. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. That's really interesting, the way that you've described that that ambition and early connections to be able to make those mechanisms for exchange of experience between countries. I want to turn now to, in a sense, what are the lessons that those here on the panel feel like are ready to share? What is working and not working about progress towards the successful landscape approaches? And Jagdish, if we can come back to you, John was mentioning about building up, this broader network, and you mentioned in your introduction some 27 organizations that have come together under the auspices of Common Ground. Maybe you could share a little bit about why you've seen that necessary, and what are the challenges that, in an Indian context, you're trying to address, as John said, at scale.
I think people come from different interests. Some are looking for social justice, some are looking for conservation priorities, some are looking for economic opportunities. And it's only natural that people enter into the system in different ways. And yet, many of us felt that the connect between nature and people needs to be strengthened. There is a wedge which has been unfortunately and unnecessarily being put between these two. And unless if we connect these two, it would only be a loss for both nature and for people. And then the diagnosis within these 23 organizations was that there are these natural systems, there are these production systems, natural systems like forest, water, and so on, and production systems like agriculture or forestry or livestock. And how is it that we connect these two when there are demands for preservation, for conservation, and for extraction? So we started going deeper into the issue and realized that why is it that these 23 actors, what is the common barriers that we all see together? That's how we narrowed down on some 3 or 4 sets of barriers that all of us agree on. We believe that the voice of local communities, the agency, their power, their control seems to be getting eroded, and no one disagreed on that. The second thing was policies are there, financial flows are there, fortunately in India, and yet context-based development doesn't happen. How do you translate practice into good policy? Third, market seems to behave in a way where the agency of local communities is not respected. They are not at the negotiating table with businesses and markets. And similarly, the digital technology seems to be not really connected to it's becoming under monster in the system, just bringing in new wisdom, but not really becoming a bidirectional one. So I think it is this common understanding of barriers which brought us all together. And then we decided on how could these 23 organizations work together. What we agreed was something like a distributed leadership amongst this and an ever-growing kind of groups coming in. That was one. The second was a pluralistic approach in the sense that there's no one size that fits all. And we need to agree. There could be spaces for disagreement, and yet that dialogue happens. And then we felt that a strong learning and adaptation mechanism has to be in place for us all to quickly see what's working and what's not working. That was the broad contours of how we understood. And when I saw the announcement, and we were asking about how landscapes connect to climate change or to land degradation or SDGs and so on, I think landscapes give a platform where all this could be addressed. It's not just forests or agriculture in silos, and that's been a big problem all the time. Siloed mindsets and siloed actors. How is it that you create a solution ecosystem where all are talking to one another? That's been the motivation behind these 23 organizations, and it's growing now. There are more and more.
Thanks a lot, Jagdish. I want to pick up on that theme around breaking down silos. And Gustavo, you mentioned a bit earlier the issue of trying to have a balance between different voices, and in Litul, you and Gustavo both were putting strong emphasis on the aspect around market engagement and market actors. But Gustavo, to come back to your experience, what have you found particularly useful in terms of trying to achieve an equitable voice, especially for those who don't usually have a say in these larger scale decisions? And what other lessons have you drawn from your experience?
Sure. So I guess one of the main challenges and the main objectives at the very beginning as a convener for landscape initiative is to try to achieve effective alignment of stakeholder interest involved in creating this platform for dialogue of decision making. And it's the idea is to ensure that they're all in participating in the planning process and ultimately achieving like very diverse and including local leaders in these dialogue platforms. So I think what we did when we tried to implement it was two main streamlines of work. The first one was to couple all the landscape scale activities with localized technical assistance and training to ensure community buy-in. I think it's important to have activities in the landscape as a convener to really start to identify those local leaderships that start emerging, and trying to bring them also to the dialogue process that you're developing at the multi-stakeholder dialogue platform. So we also implemented some empowerment activities that ensure broader participation of small and medium producers, and especially also women that were historically marginalized in our landscape. So that was a way to try to identify these emerging leaderships and trying to bring them to the decision making at the landscape level. And a second thing that I guess it was very important for us, and that was very useful to develop this multi-stakeholder platform, was to promote transparency in all the decision making and how the whole platform was beginning to structure around data. We developed a baseline from landscape. So this is a baseline to have a vision of what are the main issues of the landscape within more than 60 indicators across 4 big pillars: governance, productivity, environment, and social. From there, it was much easier to bring people to the table and discuss based on data and actual information that we were sharing. So we shifted from a discussion where everyone was kind of pointing fingers about what was the responsibility around the problems that were in the landscape, to a discussion we were talking about the data that we had and how we could solve these problems based on the data that we have gathered from the beginning of the whole process. So transparency is very important to achieve buy-in, and also couple all these landscape scale activities around governance with technical assistance to identify these local leaderships. I think those are two of the main lessons that we can have. And the challenges, I think, they are mostly very, very similar to what Jagdesh already mentioned. This silo way of thinking is very, very, very difficult to divide. We have these sectors that are very vertical in terms of the public sector. For example, you have the environmental sector with their own strategy. You have the agricultural sector with their own strategy. They're all vertical ways of thinking the territory. And what we try to foster is more a systematic way of thinking the territory of the landscape. And that is very difficult to fight against. And we're talking also about finance. Finance is very gathered, very, very dispersed in the landscape, and it's not very, very easy to cheat from this fragmented way of seeing the territory to a more holistic, systematic way of thinking the problems, but also the vision and the solutions for the long term that are represented in the landscape partnership.
Thanks, Gustavo. I think, Litul, when you were speaking before about the fashion sector, it's not perhaps the first thing that comes to mind when people think about landscape actors, but of course, those who are making use of the resources that are produced in landscapes are definitely key players. Gustavo just mentioned about the challenge of trying to break through these silos and get different actors to have a voice in decision making. What's your perspective or experience about doing that with a focus on value chains as an entry point? How does that create advantages or disadvantages in terms of trying to bring together different actors around the landscape approach?
Yeah, I think the private sector will look at it from a value chain perspective, because that's how most of the matrices are there. And I think what has been helpful for us is some of the things which also Gustavo touched upon is working on things like data impact, and then and also like at the multi-stakeholder coalition level, having a strong governance where private sector is one of the stakeholders, while they might have the focus is on the value chain, but then again, like bringing that community voice. So we have a lot of strong partners on the ground who are representing the farmer community. So as Jagdish said, also like, negotiating with the market, and that has been a journey in itself, because, earlier, especially in the fashion sector, if you talk about it, like a lot of times you don't have visibility beyond a particular tier. But we have seen in these landscapes that, the brands are directly signing MOUs with, farmer organizations. In India, we have the farmer producer companies, or in other countries, we have farmer collectives directly, where, they have good visibility on what is, where the cotton is coming from, and then, like what kind of things need to be done. While, the focus is still on the value chain, but like, they are kind of, they bought the overall, goal of the landscape. So the part of the goal setting, and also like, understanding of what is the strategic plan for landscapes. So that at a pilot level we have been able to do in the landscapes where we have worked. But then again, here we are talking about few companies who are the leaders in, like, taking that approach. So I think in terms of how this model can now go, where, like, most companies are doing that, that will need, I think, more and more of these examples to come in. And then also I think the whole work around impact becomes very critical, because right now, again, the matrices are developed in a way that you are looking at one single outcome for most, like, private sector. But like, we are doing this interesting piece of work with Gold Standard Foundation, where we are looking at, how multiple SDG outcomes within a landscape can be attributed to different stakeholders in the landscapes, depending on the investments or their stakes in the landscape. So that is something which again is being piloted with the private sector. So once you bring that in, it will be useful for them to understand, how the input they're making is leading to a larger landscape level objective. Because ultimately, when you look at, how the landscape is getting supported, I think the public sector also plays a big role. A lot of it is actually contextualizing government funding into the landscapes depend. So that's also, I think, the role of the convener. Then the private sector comes in again, as you said, more from the value chain perspective. Some the front runners might invest in beyond their value chain as well. And then, of course, like, we are now also looking at tapping into other investments such as carbon financing and all. That's something, again, a very new area. But yeah, so I think you have to look at multiple ways of bringing finance into the landscapes. And the private sector will initially come through the value chain approach, while, having but the important thing is to give them the full visibility of the landscape goal, and then build that ownership within the private sector for a particular landscape.
Thanks, Litul. I think we're going to be moving soon to questions from those online, and so please do take advantage of the Q&A function. I see a couple of people have already started that. We'll turn to that in a few moments. But I want to see whether there are any of the points that have come up that panelists would like to respond to what others have mentioned. Are there any points you'd like to jump in on that we've touched on so far? As you're thinking about that a bit, I think there are 4 or 5 pieces that are standing out for me when I'm hearing, in a sense, some of the themes that are emerging around, let's say, the elements for successful landscape approaches. One is around data. You mentioned it first, Gustavo, but Litul, I think you were speaking to that as well, and how that connects to clarity around metrics that might speak to the roles of, or the interests of, different actors in the landscape, and trying to set those so they measure progress at the landscape scale. I think it was Litul as well as Gustavo who mentioned about the critical role of convener, and we haven't been explicit about who that is in different contexts, but in some clearly it might be an NGO, and some it might be government, and some others it might be some mix of community and other actors. And we've touched on the importance of connections or kind of networks to share and exchange experience. John, you were You were mentioning that earlier as well. I just want to see, are there other sorts of key elements that you'd like to put forward, particularly when you're thinking about the third of those who are online who are partially involved in such approaches? What is it that can help those who'd like to support landscape efforts be more effective in doing so? Jagdish?
One point which probably you have missed, or which I would like to again call out between Gustavo and Litul. I think transparency element, the power of sharing the same information across multiple actors is very powerful. Of course, the governance elements, the apparatus of governance, institutional arrangements, all that is important. The second element, which Litul was alluding to, is again a very powerful one. These are not apolitical settings. There is a lot of power equation in those landscapes. Now, when multi-stakeholder processes come in and platforms are created, these are the settings in which eventually and hopefully people will behave in a less hierarchical manner, or at least the data and transparency will force them to look at hard realities of both ecological, social and economic trade-offs, which will push people either from a shaming part of it or from a celebrating part of it to bring them together. That's the hope. That's the future that I'm looking forward to. And that's the power of collaborative action.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jagdish. Any others who'd like to add kind of key pillars or takeaways in terms of what we've covered so far, or things that we've missed that you'd like to add before we turn to questions? John, please.
Yes, from the Kenyan side, one thing that we see that is quite needed in our landscapes is knowledge sharing and capacity building, because landscape activities need people who are enlightened in terms of restoring these landscapes. So where possible, partnerships that can bring about training, events and programs that are well structured to educate the farmers and local communities on sustainable practices, on climate change adaptation, efficient land use are important, because all these landscapes are actually landscapes that people live on and they derive livelihoods from there, specifically farming. Another aspect of it is research and innovation, that is collaborative projects, which is also part of the partnership we're talking about, that focus on innovative solutions for climate resilience and sustainable agriculture. And that helps because the knowledge part of it is quite important. And then secondly, in addition to that, where possible, bring in the aspect of innovative landscape finance and innovations. This could be through partnerships and or investments through the impact investing or access to funding. And that is a game changer, because to move forward, this needs to have some level of injecting some funding to be able to move forward. And that will help to bring about the adaptation, climate adaptation, restore the landscapes, and improve the food security component. That's quite okay. And something that I've seen happen in some successful landscapes is public-private partnerships that bring about the landscape finance innovation to work, either through market access or engagement with corporate engagement. This is something that I think can help and be a game changer in our landscapes. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, John. Gustavo will give you a quick comment, and then Bemi, let's hear what you're finding from the questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what John was talking about, private sector, and also Litul. And I think it's very important to have this private sector engagement from the very beginning of the initiative as a convener. And it's most of the times, and I think we've seen that before, like most of the pointing fingers goes to the agribusiness or the private sector, but we also we try to see them as a major actor that could really foster change in the landscapes. And I think a way that it's very useful to bring them to the table is just to see what are the motivations, and they're very different motivations among them. They have this idea of mitigating risks, for example, social risks in the landscape, which is a very big motivation that we identify. But also they just want to showcase what are the activities that are implementing in terms of environmental improvements in the landscapes. And I think that bringing them to the table can bring a lot of benefits to the landscape in terms of how these discussions start to foster shifting from investments that are not very aligned with the action plan or the vision of the landscape partnership, and you can start like shifting them to align better with the action plan and the landscape and landscape partnership vision. So yeah, private sector engagement, it's something that I see as something that's very important to implement at the very beginning, because trust with this sector takes time, and yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Gustavo. I think all of this makes clear that we're talking about, from a governance perspective, as Jagdish was pointing out, something much more complex than simply community-based development at a very local scale. Bemi, what would you like to draw out from the questions that are coming forward?
Yeah, thank you, Blake. Thank you, everyone, for a very interesting panel discussion. We've got some great questions that we've been compiling here. And to start, the first one, Litul, is for you, which is one of the questions we heard from participants is, how do you deal with uneven power relations when applying value chains as an entry point?
Yeah, I think I would not say value chain is the entry point from the loudest perspective. It was more like a realization that, just working on one commodity is not going to create the impact which we wanted to do. But what I was saying is the private sector will always come from a value chain perspective in the landscapes. And while of course a lot of them want to create impact at a beyond the value chain as well. But I think, as you know, you're talking about ultimately the ownership of the landscape, and it's a journey is should be at the local level. So the people who are the custodian of the landscape, and that's where the governance and strengthening local institutions play a big role, and then also the role of the convener is very important in terms of how you are working on those critical things, and then having that voice, grassroots voice is also very critical, and that's something which we acknowledge that's still there when like you are being a big private company with a farmer organization. But I think that's again, landscapes are very long initiatives, and I think this itself is a big journey in itself. And we have to start at some point, but you also have to realize that if you look at in terms of what can fund this kind of initiatives, the private sector is almost 75% of the economy, and then the other big player is the public sector. And like, unless you bring them into the landscapes, a lot of the work which you want to do, and I think that's where I think a lot of the funding is also going to come for, and it's critical. And I think what, as a neutral convener, or we can play a role is basically working towards bringing that local voice, and strengthening local institution, and also working towards a goal where the ownership is fully at the local level, I think. And that's very critical, and that sometimes work well in some setting, and sometimes I think it's challenging, and those are some of the challenges when you are trying to implement the landscape level program at Maldives. The ground.
Great, no, thank you. This next question is for the panel in general, so multiple of you all can chime in, which is,
I'll just read it aloud. Interested to hear how Jagdish, John, and others on the panel shaped a funding model that allows for adaptation and iteration. As I'm sure a landscape approach will uncover learnings that may cause a change in project direction, as Jagdish mentioned. It's a great question. So maybe Jagdish, I start with you, and then we can go from there.
Just give me a second. I'm reading it.
I'll put it in the chat again too, if you'd like. Or did you find it? And you touched on this a little bit, sort of the funding model that allows for adaptation, iteration, and new learnings.
Probably we are those lucky ones who have unrestricted funding. And what I find interesting amongst funders in general is they're beginning to realize that besides the tall claims that implementing organizations make, they know that there are some things which are not working. Yeah. And to bring that into the actual, discussion table is a bold thing that they're doing. So, in fact, most of the funders ask what's working and what's not working. I think that's a kind of a improvement both for the practitioners or the grantees and the funders. So I don't know if I've answered the question in particular, but it's basically adaptation. And I think even all the recipients, the grant recipients, we are all in this not for just the funds, right? We are interested in fixing a problem. So the more honest we are about how we are achieving the purpose of either landscapes or any other wicked problem that we are facing, I think that honesty in debate with funders would improve the whole portfolio. And I find it increasingly happening with funders too. So they're asking real questions and they're amenable to any kind of budget mix, every year change in the objective itself. That's hard to believe, but yes, they're open to changing the objective to making the objective a longer term or intermediate objective and something shorter to begin with. So that's a kind of a discussion one needs to be transparent about. And I think collaborative multi-stakeholder process, when even the funder is sitting in them, they realize the complexity of this and slowly appreciate, that it's not a panacea that you create a project this way. And they're realizing that flexibility, long-term nature, pay what it takes are becoming. But I do know that these kind of funders are only 10%, but at least the 10% is there.
That's great, Jagdish. John, you have your hand up? Oh, and then Gustavo.
Yes. Okay. So yes, in Kenya, under the Kenya Landscape Atlas platform, some of the landscapes that we have, there are three major ways that we are seeing funding that is useful. The first one is apart from groups just accessing grants, there is the incentives for impact investment finance. And this has taken root in some landscapes around Mount Kenya, for example. The second part of that is incentives around certifications, where Rainforest Alliance, for example, is involved, and Fair Trade Africa, we have seen that. To an extent, we are seeing a few models of payment for ecosystem services that are taking root, but still needs many stakeholders to come in. And that's where the platform is providing the partnerships to ensure that this does take place. And then carbon credits. Recently, in the month of May, Kenya provided the Kenyan government provided the first climate change carbon markets regulations in Africa, and this came into force on 17th of May 2024 to provide technical regulatory oversight for participation in carbon markets in Kenya. We've got carbon credit projects that are there from the blue oceans, that is mangroves in the Indian Ocean, to the rangelands and also the forests. And some of the best RED Plus projects are in Kenya, and we see that that is a way to bring about carbon and climate finance in a way. And then lastly, I think I mentioned already, the public-private partnerships that leverage additional resources for landscape protection and conservation. This is there specifically in the Rift Valley of Kenya around the lakes like Lake Naivasha, where we've got the so-called Naivasha Restoration Ecosystem, which is a public-private partnership that has worked for the past 15 years. It is actually one of the models that can be scaled up elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Gustavo?
Yeah, I'm just going to talk about a little bit of the experience we had in Sierra de Tapalpa with Thousand Landscapes Finance Accelerator. One of the main challenge, I guess, from the funding side is to balance immediate community needs with long-term sustainability promoting practices, and at the same time provide short-term economic benefits, but with a long-term vision. And within the finance design team of Thousand Landscapes, under the leadership of Agricultural Partners and Rainforest Alliance, we developed a landscape finance accelerator. One of the 3 landscapes that were piloted was the Mexico pilot. And we ran all the process to identify what were the financial flows, where were they going, and how we could start like aligning all this finance towards the action plan objectives. And at some point, of course, the idea is to develop a landscape holistic finance strategy and a finance mechanism as an umbrella for the landscape. But this is a process that could take long term, 3 to 4 years to build. And at some point, we decided that we had to somehow continue supporting the small and medium farmers projects and supported access to finance. So bring them to the sources for this finance and aim at these low-hanging fruits, because for us it was very important, even if it was time-consuming for us, but it was very necessary to have the partnership alive and to keep the momentum high of the partnership. So I think one of these challenges are to balance these long-term finance objectives that you can try to achieve through mechanism and umbrella mechanism, and the very, very specific and short-term objectives to benefit some of the actors that could keep the landscape partnership going.
Thanks, Gustavo. That's great. So we've got some great questions coming in. In the interest of time, I may try to do my best. Bear with me to combine some of them so that we can try to get to a lot of these. So some of the questions are centered around landscape partnerships. So one is, from you all's experience, is there a process or sort of a template that you go to as a process for creating landscape partnerships? And that's one. And then another one that's distinct but different, but I'm trying to maybe combine these a bit, is how, in your experience, have you seen landscape partnerships support local livelihoods? And if you can share any specific examples and stories from your experience, that would be great. So landscape partnerships, either a process, a template that you kind of gravitated towards, and then how, in your experience, have you so you've seen them support local livelihoods. And different panelists can choose to sort of, based on their experience, maybe answer one or both of those, or one of them in more depth. And I could put them in the chat. Okay.
Well, the first question is rather straightforward, I think. Just go to Thousand Landscapes website and you'll find a whole toolkit around it.
Thanks, Jagdeep. I didn't want to say that. I thought about that.
I was also going to say that.
I could give that plug.
That's not the only solution place, but that's one of them. So maybe there could be others, and we need to build a communities of practice around how this could be built. Yeah, and so each contribution would enrich it rather than treat it like another Bible. That's one. The second thing is, it's difficult to differentiate between initiatives, say, on an agriculture part or on a forestry part or a livestock part, and piece it with what is the attribution to landscape partnerships. Yeah, because you would say, yeah, we would do the same thing in agriculture or in forestry. What's so different and in its contribution to local livelihoods? But I think the answer is when you look at issues of real marginalized people or socially, excluded people, landscapes offer much better spaces. There are many people who are really on the margins, like livestock keepers or people with small holding agriculture. The connection between the agriculture, its longevity, its productivity is much better when it's connected with the larger farming system or a larger landscape. Even for a woman who has probably a small piece of land where she cultivates some cereal, the addition to a better forest would increase her income, or might be the most critical food that she consumes or brings to the household during the very dry seasons. So it is the combination of all this which actually provides social spaces as well as food security and livelihood spaces to those on the margins. I think that's the power of this. In a very clear example, it will be, yeah, if you have forests, the hydrology improves, so agriculture remains stable, and therefore the agricultural person's livelihood. But I think the social spaces, the people who are on the margins, could tend to benefit more when you look at the whole and you look at various opportunities.
Thank you, Jagdish. John, did you have your hand up? Did you want to, or is that okay?
Yes, I just wanted to give like 2 examples of outstanding initiatives where there are benefits in Kenya. There is, for example, one of the association's members is the National Alliance of Community Forest Associations in Kenya. This is an umbrella organization of the community forest associations in the country, and there is a way they derive benefits from forests as they conserve them across the landscapes. Then another one also related to forestry is the so-called Forest Value Chain Association of Kenya, for example. And those are just like 2 examples. And these, for example, are all the way from the mangrove forests that are there across the Indian Ocean, all the way to the Mount Kenya Mau Forest Complex and Mount Elgon. They have a role to play, but when you look at it, they are local initiatives which are so much focused on conserving the landscape at the local level, but deriving benefits. And for the sake of making it to have impact at scale, they are part of an umbrella organization that is national, now affiliated to this bigger platform that now brings them together with the farmlands, beyond the forest lands, with the rangelands, and with the mountains and hills. And that is helping to take things at scale in terms of restoration and landscape management. Thank you.
Litu, I'll let you answer real quick, and then we'll do maybe one more quick question, and then I'm going to hand it over to Blake to sort of wrap things up, and then we'll just want to be conscientious of time. Okay, Litu.
Sure. So very quickly, I think on the first question, I think, of course, Jagdish said we can look at the 1000L templates, and there are others as well. But I think what is important is also, I think the context is very important in each landscapes, because I think every landscape will be different. So taking that template and understanding that context and that's very critical. In terms of the livelihood opportunities, again, I think I fully agree with what Jagdish was saying. I think looking at the whole is very critical. So while traditional projects has also looked at livelihood, but here, for example, in the landscapes where we have supported, so you of course diversify the crop mix, you try to find market for different crops, look at entrepreneurial opportunities within for bio inputs. When you're talking about regenerative agriculture, agroforestry is very critical as for hydrology and even for other sources of income that can also lead to a better productivity. Now we are also looking at as John was saying, how carbon finance can come in. So there are a lot of opportunities when you're looking at the whole, instead of one thing, and taking a project-based approach. So I think that's where I think the landscape approach can be very critical. So yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. One last question, and we'll try to be brief on it if we have time, which is, I think this was more geared towards Gustavo, actually, if I recall correctly, is can you talk briefly a bit more about Landscale and its results in data collection? The people are curious about how it can be used to measure success.
Yeah, sure. So Landscale, it's a tool about how to monitor and evaluate performance at the landscape level. But I see it also as a way to engage dialogue with different kind of stakeholders from the same landscape. You have around 60 to 70 indicators across 4 pillars: governance, productivity, social, and environmental. And from there, you have a platform where you can access all this information about landscape. You have a narrative, and the idea is to have a dashboard of how your landscape is really advancing on landscape objectives with the specific indicators. And it really helps to foster dialogue between the different actors in the landscape. We're also trying to develop a claim feature. So the actors that are actually investing and making actions in the landscape can claim it and be verified by Landscale as how they are contributing to these landscape level objectives. So I could leave the Landscale webpage in the chat if you want, so that way you
We
can
added it
see
already, Gustavo.
further information.
Yeah, no, perfect. Great minds. It's someone already added it. Thank you, Bree and Dean. Thank you. With
sounds
that, I think
great.
I'll hand it to Blake. Yeah, go ahead, Blake, and you can kind of
Thanks a
wrap
lot,
us up
Bemi.
here.
I think it's nice that we've wrapped up that discussion with some specific examples of tools, the Landscale one that Gustavo was mentioning. I think what we're hoping is that through this dialogue, people will have their interests perked in terms of other tools and offerings that are available through the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 Billion People initiative. There are those, for example, that address questions that were being asked around blended finance, around investor preparedness was one of the other questions. We're working on and looking for collaborators to help address issues around effectively dealing with power differences and in a sense, the political economy of governance in landscape processes. So there's opportunities to collaborate about things like that. There's been attention and some questions we didn't get to around private sector engagement. Again, a lot of space for collaboration on exchange of lessons and, as John was saying earlier, capacity building resources, but still space to build more on these topics. The policy issue is one that is of growing importance and recognition. We're actively seeking additional partners who have expertise and interest in sharing and developing synthesis of good practices around policy support to landscape level action. So these are a few examples. I think it's appropriate that in a sense we have no way done full justice to the scale of the challenges that those on the panel have begun to share experience about. But this is an initiative that we hope all of those who are gathered will be eager to connect to, so that we can continue this journey together and learn more about how to achieve the change that is so important for local actors and for the global challenges that we began this discussion about. Over to you, Bemi.
Thank you. No, that's a great way to close this. So thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for your time today. I think we just shared on the slides, and I don't know if you want to share again, but there's the 1000L, the global website, and it's really meant to be, it is a growing space. It's a community space for folks to do peer-to-peer learning, to come together. We're all looking at landscapes from slightly different perspectives and scales. So it's meant to be a place to be a community of practice. And so we really welcome everyone's expertise and what they can bring in ways that we can contribute to capacity strengthening in ways, Blake, like you just described. And so, if there's areas that we're growing in terms of developing modules and facilitation and peer spaces and thinking about ways to fund this and models for funding, whether it's around integrated landscape finance or diversity and inclusion and justice and all sorts of other things, youth engagement, and much more. So thank you everyone for your time today. And thank you so much, panelists, for spending time together today. And I really appreciate everyone's perspectives. And thank you, thank you everyone. So and I think we can go ahead and close it. We're right at time, if not a minute over. So thank you.
Thanks very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Hope we
very
can stay in
much.
touch.